Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining today's webinar. Don't leave behind 85% of the value of your data, the unstructured data imperative. We still have a few folks signing on, so we'll give them a few minutes to get settled in, and then we will go ahead and get started. Thank you. Thanks again, everyone. I know we have quite a few people still joining here, so if we could just sit tight for a few more minutes, we want to make sure we give everyone a chance to get settled, and then we'll get started in another minute or so. Thanks. Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. So thanks again, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. Don't leave behind 85% of the value of your data, the unstructured data imperative. My name is Jeremy Stinson, and I will be your moderator. I work on the marketing team here at Indico, and I'm excited to be hosting today's session. First, today's webinar will be available on demand after the live session. We'll be sure to send a follow-up note after today's webinar with a link to the recording. We've also added some attachments. We're available through the attachments tab at the bottom of the screen. There you can find today's deck, the Everest Group white paper, IDP for unstructured documents, and other related content. Next, we'd love to hear from you during today's presentation. If you have a question for our speakers, please feel free to send it through the Ask a Question tab at the bottom of your screen. We'll be answering questions at the end of the session. If we don't get to your question during today's webinar, we'll be sure to follow up afterwards. Next, I'd like to introduce today's speakers. First, Anil Vijayan leads Everest Group's service optimization technologies and human resource outsourcing membership and custom decision support programs globally, with responsibilities spanning growth, client relationships, and talent agenda. He advises senior stakeholders on digital transformation and disruptive technologies such as RPA, AI, and process mining. Prior to joining Everest Group, Anil was with Ernst & Young's advisory businesses. He holds an MBA from the Indian Institute of Management. Tom Wilde brings 25 years of experience in solving the complex problems of digital content to the role of CEO of Indico Data. Prior to joining Indico Data, Tom was the Chief Product Officer at CSense, a leading data management provider, and founder of Ramp, an enterprise video content management company. Tom has held senior roles at FastSearch, Miva Systems, and Lycos. He has extensive experience with company building and venture-backed startups and holds an MBA in entrepreneurial management from Wharton. With that being said, I will hand it over to Neil to kick us off.
Thank you, Jeremy. Hello, everyone. As Jeremy mentioned, my name is Anil Vijayan. I'm a partner at Everest Group, where I lead our research on next generation technologies such as robotic process automation, artificial intelligence-based solutions, process mining, and so on. Thank you for joining in today. It's a pleasure to be speaking with all of you. Next slide, please. So with that, let me start with the core agenda of today, and that will, of course, revolve around intelligent document processing, or IDP broadly. But then we will also do a deep dive into the unstructured document use case that the IDP solutions can tackle, right? So IDP essentially is a category of artificial intelligence-based solutions that can help automate data extraction from a variety of document formats. Now, as we go through the contents, I'll walk you through the need for document-centric automation, what IDP is exactly and how it is being adopted, I will then speak to how IDP needs to be looked at differently when considering the unstructured document use cases, and then finally end with certain considerations on that front, right, when you're tackling unstructured document use cases using IDP solutions. Next slide, please. All right, so we all know that data is all important in an organization today. Particularly when we talk about digital transformation, whether it be analytics or artificial intelligence, data plays a foundational role in enabling these. The reality is we are looking at very much the tip of the iceberg when it comes to data that we currently use within an organization. So think about data points and elements that all of us process or use every day. Now, these are typically arranged in Excel's databases, systems of record, which access those databases, and so on. That is, they're structured in a manner that makes it easy for machines to consume and process. But that structured data is just 20% of the data residing in an organization. 80 or 85% or so, by our estimates, is semi-structured or unstructured, ranging from documents such as invoices, emails, contracts, and so on, to media such as images, voice or video files, etc. For the remainder of the session, I will, of course, speak specifically to the document use case. That tends to be the most voluminous in any case across industries, and hence should be of particular interest to enterprises. Next slide, please. All right, now, in order to be able to use the semi-structured or unstructured documents that I described, we need to convert them into structured data. That's the way meaningful data is stored in enterprises and consumed. A large part of that activity is done manually today. This is, of course, a time-consuming job. Often it is a tedious one as well, and hence prone to human error. Now, there have been tools such as optical character recognition and template-based solutions that have been employed to capture specific data elements from documents. But while these are helpful, they tend to produce incorrect results when either the templates change or input document quality varies and so on. And in today's world, we often get a whole bunch of documents through mobile images. It comes in almost equal measure along with high quality scans. So that is a real valid issue today. So this is where technologies such as IDP come into play. They provide the ability to automate the conversion of semi-structured and unstructured documents into structured data, regardless of the template or variations in quality and so on. And they do so through artificial intelligence. And on the next slide, we'll dig a little deeper into IDP, right? So as mentioned earlier, IDP is a solution that enables extraction and subsequent processing of specific data elements from documents using artificial intelligence or machine learning or deep learning techniques. Now, these documents are typically text-based documents such as forms and emails. It can also be, and often is, scanned images of text documents and so on. Now, since IDP relies on AI techniques that uses pattern recognition and associations to do the job, it is more resilient to changes in templates and input variations, which often lead to breakdown of traditional document processing solutions that I mentioned in the earlier slide. So any enterprise-grade IDP system would have, in essence, 4 key steps. The first one is pre-processing. The input document which comes into the system can be either in electronic format, or as it is often, it's in the form of a scan. Now, in case the scan has issues with either clarity or skew or white space or some other issue, some of these can be corrected through image pre-processing techniques to make it more usable in the next stage, which is optical character recognition or OCR. So OCR converts the scan or image into machine readable and searchable text. This is essentially what that data capture stage achieves. The second step is then classification. So once the document is digitized and captured, it can be classified based on either the text or the visual elements of the document or both. So for instance, suppose you have a source which gives you both scanned invoices and purchase order documents. In that case, you can train the IDP system to identify each document which comes in as one of either purchase orders or invoices and appropriately route them to different queues or storage silos for further processing. The third step in many ways is critical to IDP, and it's where the solution recognizes and extracts specific data elements from the documents based on what you have trained it to do. So for instance, in an invoice example, you could have configured and trained the IDP solution to identify and extract, say, vendor name, invoice number, and so on. Now, once extraction is done, you have essentially converted semi-structured or unstructured data into structured data, which can then be processed far more easily. There may be a validation step after this conversion as well. You can potentially, let's say, apply certain business rules and check for internal consistency. You can also use external sources for validation. For example, you can do lookups, check the databases, validate against those, and so on. Post-validation, the extracted information can be passed down to other systems for automated data entry or even further processing. So essentially, this is how an IDP solution works. Now, since both classification and extraction are based on AI algorithms, you can choose to have a human in the loop to verify the output if needed. So AI-based solutions typically provide confidence scores to tasks that they execute. So for instance, if an IDP solution is, say, 75% certain that it has extracted a vendor name accurately from an invoice document, the confidence score will be 75%. Now, at a process level or document or field level, you can set a threshold that you're comfortable with. And anything which falls below the threshold of accuracy, you can have a human verify the output and potentially correct it. So let's say the threshold is 75% and the IDP system extracts the vendor name with only 65% confidence. Then it'll get routed to a human agent for verification or correction. If corrected, the feedback goes to the AI algorithm and it gets trained on the corrected data and consequently learns and gets better. So over time, you'll generally see that the accuracy of the system improves and you get a greater degree of straight-through processing or automation. This is, of course, a defining characteristic of many of the AI solutions that we have, that it learns and gets better with time. Next slide, please. All right, so IDP is a relatively nascent market, but over the last 2-3 years or so, it has started to show tremendous growth. Now, our numbers show that the adoption has been increasing by more than 50% year on year, and we expect this to actually continue going forward as well. Of course, there was some impact due to COVID-19. Most industries were affected, similar with IDP. But we expect that automation broadly and IDP in particular will accelerate in a post-COVID-19 environment. Couple of reasons for that. One, essentially because of the lockdown and time lost during 2020 and even parts of 2021 for that matter, there is still pent-up demand for IDP. So a lot of that will start to materialize over the next couple of years. Second, there is a need for accelerated transformation. And a lot of enterprises want to do this quickly because of the whole situation that they were forced to face during the lockdown. And they realize that, they need to build up resilience and there is some urgency now to automate as much as possible within business processes. Next slide, please. So as far as the use cases are concerned, we see both horizontal as well as vertical or industry-specific use cases. The two biggest ones are the vertical specific banking processes such as mortgages, KYC, trade finance, etc., and the horizontal finance and accounting process, right? In particular, this is invoice processing constitutes a lot of that. Now, of course, we expect other use cases to pick up as well, including healthcare, where you have documents such as patient registration, prescriptions, and so on. In insurance, you have claims, which is a very popular use case. And as the technology is maturing, we are seeing more and more unstructured documents such as contracts, emails, and so on. Next slide, please. All right. So now that we have a reasonable understanding of IDP as a technology, let's go a little deeper into why IDP for unstructured documents need to be treated somewhat differently to that for semi-structured documents. Next slide, please. And of course, before we go there, let's define these. Now, I believe we all have an intuitive understanding for what these terms mean, but it's still useful to define. Now, in structured documents, the content really conforms to a static template, or it's explicitly coded as metadata, right? So a static form or database or structured Excel would be an example of these. And really to process some of these, you can use actually a rules-based system because it can be encoded into machine language that way. But when it comes to semi-structured documents, what you have is you have some variability of layout or semantic expression. But overarchingly, there are still some pointers to the overall organizational structure, right? So for example, in invoices, you would know that, let's say the invoice date tag would typically appear in combination with the actual invoice date, right? So although the position of where these appear may vary, right? In one case, it may be top left. In another case, it may be possibly in the middle or bottom right, and so on and so forth. So documents of this nature, that is invoices, purchase orders, receipts, etc., these are semi-structured. Unstructured naturally is everything else. Essentially, they do not have a predefined layout, and neither do they have consistent pointers to the overarching structure. An example would be a text-heavy document such as contracts, or even other documents that contain a multitude of data types such as annual reports. So as you can imagine, the unstructured use case is typically more complex, not just from a machine or an automation perspective, but typically even for a human as well while doing the processing. And because of this, as we can see on the next slide, IDP for unstructured documents would differ from that for semi-structured documents, and it differs along different dimensions. This is an important nuance to understand. So as I mentioned earlier, the problem complexity is significantly different. As a result of the complexity, the technology required for IDP solutions that cater to unstructured documents is different as well. Some of the capabilities are different, and some of the modalities are different. With semi-structured documents, you may be able to do with, let's say, visual elements as the input features to the algorithm within the IDP solution, along with certain word tags. But when it comes to unstructured, it often requires more complex natural language processing based solutions along with visual elements, therefore making it multimodal. And finally, the outcomes themselves would be different. For semi-structured documents, you can expect some degree of straight-through processing. There would be documents that can go straight through without human intervention. But IDP for unstructured documents will not work that way. So we are not at a point where the tech is advanced enough to send it straight through. So what this means is that the IDP solution will still be able to identify, say, the relevant clauses or statements and even extract the correct data elements. But generally, you have a human review the output as well. Now, by no means this is a small feat, because keep in mind that these are inherently more complex and often larger documents. and generally take more time to manually process anyway. So even without straight-through processing, there's a great deal of benefits that are generated and savings as well, simply through productivity improvement of having data extracted for review. So in the case of semi-structured documents, in terms of measurement, you may be measuring, let's say, straight-through processing as an outcome. But for unstructured documents, again, you need to possibly be looking at, let's say, turnaround time or time on task, which can be significantly reduced through IDP. Next slide, please. Now, since IDP ends up significantly reducing the workload of processing complex documents, naturally certain benefits accrue. You have the baseline benefit of reduction cost of processing, of course, but additionally, by taking some of the tedious workload off, it can also help improve employee experience, for instance. Any degree of automation reduces reliance on humans and therefore builds up resilience from an organizational process point of view. Governance and compliance can be improved. So one example we have seen of this in action is, let's say, adverse event reporting in pharmacovigilance, right? So IDP simply enables the enterprise to cast a wider net in that case, taking in input from multiple channels, identifying the relevant ones, extracting required data and recording it and so on. Next slide, please. Okay, so let's look at some of the capabilities that are required specifically for unstructured IDP. I will spend some time on these just to bring out, again, the point that IDP for unstructured documents requires this different or differentiated set of capabilities as compared to that for semi-structured IDP. The first one is document routing and splitting. Now, routing a document to the appropriate queue for further processing is part of a typical IDP as well. Generally, it is done through machine learning or deep learning based classification techniques. Now, in many unstructured use cases, you may have multi-page documents, each page of which may need to be processed differently after classification. So you may need to first split these documents by pages as well. So for example, there could be a use case, let's say, where you get an email with financial statements, all in one PDF attachment, right? In that case, the email may be classified and routed based on its contents and sent to the appropriate queue. The attachment may then be downloaded and split into different documents, such as cash flow statement, balance sheet, etc., and then further routed to different queues or storage silos for appropriate processing. And all of this can be done using an IDP solution. Next, we have the extraction part. As I mentioned, extraction itself will be more complex in the unstructured use case, as it may have to rely on NLP and visual techniques. An example of this could be extraction of, let's say, a renewal date from a clause within a contract, right? And possibly that it is buried deep within that clause, and maybe it is either in MMDDYY format, or it can just be spelled out, or it can be something else, right? So it still needs to be extracted from within that clause. And of course, the date would not just need to be extracted, but also presented in the normalized format based on how you would use it for further processing, right? So maybe it may need to be converted from the text-based format to a MMDDYY format. Next, there's the comparison functionality. In unstructured use cases such as contracts or legal agreements, sometimes it's necessary to validate a particular document against the prescribed template, right? Of course, depending on the process and the use case. The idea here is to identify deviations. In that case, the IDP solution should be able to compare changes, not really to text or words as such, but rather to aspects such as meanings of clauses and so on, right? So you want to make sure that, let's say, something has changed, that change is material in terms of the meaning of the clause. And to do this kind of a comparison, you would again require NLP capabilities. Then we have relationship inference. Now, there may be various data types with inherent relationships in an unstructured use case. And the IDP solution should be able to understand these and extract appropriately based on relevant context and associations, right? So an example of this would be tables in annual reports. And then finally, we have cognitive search, which is essentially the ability to search documents and extract information through natural language and meaning rather than this keywords or tags. Again, one example of where this could be used is in searching past contracts for particular clauses. Another example could be, querying a policy document on, let's say, leave eligibility using natural language again. So as you can see, unstructured IDP solutions really need to have additional and somewhat different capabilities to semi-structured IDP solutions. Next slide, please. Okay, so what does the market look like for the unstructured use cases? Well, it's a smaller part of the market for sure, constituting around 16% of the market today. And there are reasons for this, right? So one reason is in the initial days, technology was not sophisticated enough to deal with the unstructured use case appropriately. Now things have changed, or things have moved quite a bit since then. So this may no longer really be a valid reason. The second one was, given the complexity of some of these use cases and the criticality of these to the processes that enterprises run, the lower hanging fruit or maybe the easier ones to start with were use cases such as invoices and POs, and enterprises often went for those use cases first, right? But now with more maturity, both on the supply and the demand side, what we are seeing is that the unstructured market is really poised for above market growth rates. And keep in mind, the market itself is growing at more than 50%. There are several use cases where unstructured IDP could create significant impact. I spoke a great deal about contracts, but take resumes for instance. Now, resumes tend to be, again, unstructured, and extracting information from them in order to shortlist candidates is a very time-consuming job for recruiters. In fact, in some recruitment processes, additional information also may be collected through, let's say, social media and so on to gauge suitability and fit for the role. Now, in both these kind of exercises, IDP can play a crucial role by automating extraction and presenting the information for review, thereby significantly cutting time to shortlist and speeding up your recruitment cycle. Similarly, think about emails. Most of our working lives are, of course, consumed in emails. The whole organizational communication backbone is emails. And if you consider the example of a contact center receiving customer emails, there may be a multitude of different kinds of emails that come in that need to be routed to different agents for processing, say one for account opening, one for complaint resolution, and so on. Again, through the classification functionality, IDP can help automatically route. Further, it may be able to extract critical information required to achieve the tasks mentioned in the email. So in the case of account opening, maybe there would be attachments with an account opening form, and the data inside there can be extracted and entered into downstream system for the actual account opening through IDP. So net, there are plenty of use cases, and we have really barely scratched the surface when it comes to unstructured IDP. Next slide, please. All right, so finally, let's take a look at what you should be thinking about as you seek to adopt IDP for unstructured documents. Next slide, please. The first thing to keep in mind is alignment among stakeholders. AI-based technologies have, of course, got their fair share of publicity, and we are at a point where different people have different expectations, right? So some may conflate the ability of these products as being maybe closer to what would be theoretical general AI, while others may think of these products as sustaining indefinitely with no need for correction for things like model deterioration and so on. So Even getting all stakeholders on the same page in terms of expectation can be a challenge for a relatively new solution such as IDP. And this problem, of course, can be compounded for unstructured documents, because even those who are familiar with IDP may not necessarily understand the difference between how it applies to semi-structured versus how it's used for unstructured. Further to that, the solution itself is often funded by business, since they seek to gain the most through operational benefits. But having IT alignment is critical, especially if the solution scales up and starts to touch other enterprise IT systems as well. Automation initiatives also create apprehensions of job losses. So continuous communication and proactively addressing concerns is key to obtaining support for the initiative. In some cases, you may have to reskill or upskill part of the workforce, and all of this change management, training, and communication initiatives need to be handled with the necessary efficiency and sensitivity. Now, part of the workforce handling the data entry may also continue to bring their expertise to bear by acting as human in the loop, which is a second key consideration on this list. As I mentioned before, for unstructured IDP, human in the loop is the standard. So plan for a human in the loop construct, not only on the people side of things, but also in terms of the workflow and expectation setting. Next, you have monitoring and ongoing improvements. Now, you can't really assess performance or aim to improve if you don't measure, and that maxim stands true for IDP as well. In this case, some of the metrics you may want to keep track of are accuracy rates, right? So for extraction, for instance, you may want to monitor what the accuracy rates are and see if they show improvement over time. It can also give you a sense of model deterioration or need to retrain certain models, right? The second one is volume of documents processed and time taken, and this is where you can simply look at what is the direct benefit that you're getting, especially if you have established a baseline of what it used to, or what time it used to take when processing was done manually. And then finally, there's workforce analytics. Now, human workforce metrics such as number of documents reviewed, corrections made, time spent on particular document types can also help enterprises in analyzing productivity and user training needs. The final consideration in this section is the IDP solution itself. It merits repeating that the capabilities required are different from those needed for semi-structured, and we saw a few of the critical ones earlier. And if we move to the next slide, we can see that apart from those capabilities, you may also want to consider other aspects such as training. That is, does the solution come with pre-training for your particular use case? Can it reduce training requirements through transfer learning techniques and so on? Other considerations such as explainability, integration capability, workflow and analytics, all of these may also be important depending on the use case and the organization specific situations. So with that, I come to the end of my time. IDP in unstructured use cases is a very exciting area, and it's poised for rapid rise in adoption. So if you haven't considered it yet, now is certainly a good time to dive in. Over to you, Tom.
Excellent. Thanks, Anil. Great content. And thanks for everyone for attending today. So I'm Tom Wilde, the CEO of Indico. I'll just give you the obligatory Indico at a glance slide here. A couple of highlights. Our focus is turning unstructured data into valuable insights for major corporations around the world. We focus primarily on large entities, Fortune 500s across banking, insurance, commercial real estate, and back office more horizontally. And we're built for scale. So we process, just as an example, over 90% of all the US titles and deeds every month. That's about 50 million documents per year, about 3 billion pages of documents per year. We probably process in excess of 10 billion items per year across our customer base. And so I'll get into some details about what is unique about Indico, and Anil really set the table for why is unstructured a unique problem requiring a unique approach, and we'll go through that here in the Indico section. Next slide. So when we think about, next slide, the transformation opportunity here, what you see is that almost half of all expenses are really locked up into the top key processes across banking and insurance and real estate. And that means there's tremendous opportunity to gain efficiencies by attacking those with automation and with digital transformation types approaches. Next. And so McKinsey looks at this and says that today those are mostly manual. There's a tremendous amount of manual processes in these major critical workflows in the enterprise. And the opportunity to gain traction through automation, transformation, digitization is really high. Next slide. Next. In fact, they estimate that these companies can gain something between a 1 and a 4-point percentage improvement in the expense ratios. If you're in insurance or banking, you know that expense ratios are sort of the main metric that gets tracked outside of revenue. That is the cost to deliver that revenue. And while 1 to 4 points sounds a little bit small, you have to realize that's getting applied against an expense line that might be $10, $20 billion if you're talking about a major bank. And so that yields tens of millions of dollars in potential savings by making this improvement to these major workflows and processes. Next. And by that, we're talking about the millions of unstructured items that exist within the enterprise that make up key parts of those key processes. It's things like documents and emails and policies and claims and invoices and forms and images. Very interestingly, images become much more prevalent now around things like claims and marketing, where even the analysis of photographs becomes part of the unstructured mix, or the analysis of call center transcripts or videos. All of this is this unstructured cluster that today is sort of a dark hole for the enterprise in gaining insights and leverage to drive this expense improvement. Next. So what's the problem here? And we'll lay this out really nicely, and I'll just kind of cover it a little bit again here, which is for the last several decades, to be honest, the traditional approach to unstructured has really been just some form of either rule-based approach like regular expressions, or OCR templating approach, which really tries to look at the layout of a document to define and discern where the data is on that document. These are very brittle, very expensive, very technical to put in place, and require tremendous maintenance on a go-forward basis. If you look at next slide, this impact gap gets closed by the Indico data platform. So we're able to, with a very modern and breakthrough artificial intelligence approach, which I'll talk about in a moment, allow our customers to build custom understanding of their unstructured data elements, like documents, emails, and so forth that I described, define and extract key valuable data assets, and make that part of their overall compute footprint. So you can see on the bottom there just some examples of RPA, business intelligence, low-code application platforms. All of these are current investments that the enterprise has already made. And so the key is, can you make unstructured part of the power of all of these enterprises already in place, which means you're suddenly made them much more valuable than they were before you could handle unstructured. Next slide. So the unstructured data platform is really comprised of the Indico Context Cloud, which is the core AI advantage that we bring to the table, a suite of services to help customers become successful, and a suite of out-of-the-box integrations and plugins, allowing you to make this unstructured data part of your enterprise compute footprint. Next. We really talk about helping customers derive value from unstructured in 3 ways. First and foremost, and the predominant messaging that Anil walked through, is around automation. Can you gain efficiency through the automated intake, classification, extraction, and validation of your unstructured data, documents, emails, and so forth? Next. Once you have that unstructured data turned into structure, you want to analyze it. So can you find trends, patterns? Can you search that data? Can you compare those documents, one to another, one to a group, so that you can then gain valuable insights into this unstructured data that's now become structured? And then lastly, next, can you apply this data? So once you have it, can you rethink the way that many of these processes work today? In fact, many of our customers now have taken a look at key middle and back office processes, step back now that they have access to this unstructured data, and created brand new ways to process some of these key workflows, like lease abstraction in real estate, or annuity analysis in life insurance, or commercial lending in the banking space. Basically, suddenly providing their knowledge workers with bionic arms so that they can now process this data much faster, much more accurately, and much more intelligently. Next slide. Okay, so let's take you through what is different here. How have we been able to accomplish? So as you can see on the left-hand side there, one of the biggest challenges with applying artificial intelligence to any enterprise problem, but specifically to unstructured data, is it's not enough just to think about this in terms of a machine learning problem. Building a model is only the first, say, 20% of your problem. And that's what we often encounter with customers, is they've had a very high failure rate with their AI initiatives. And that's because this sort of data science part of this is only a small part of the overall problem. You still need to deploy, maintain, and explain that AI's behavior on a go-forward basis. Next. So Indico has developed what we describe as a composite AI approach to understanding unstructured. And we call it composite because it is a set of multiple approaches we take that put the power of artificial intelligence in our customers' hands. One of the big philosophies we have at Indico is this technology should be usable by business users. You shouldn't have to be a data scientist. You shouldn't have to be a software engineer. The business user is at the very center of the persona that we want to bring this capability to. We start by a multimodal fusion approach. What this means is when you think about unstructured data and documents in particular, there are many signals that lead to the understanding of what's on that document. It could be the layout, it could be the syntax, it could be the language, it could be the template. And so using all of those signals together dramatically improves the understanding of what's on the unstructured data or the document. Next. Second, we use transfer learning, which is a deep learning technique, to bring the power of this into the line of business hands. So unlike most machine learning approaches or AI approaches, which need thousands and thousands of training examples to build a machine learning understanding of a problem, and some of you may have experienced this before when you've tried to use AI to solve these problems, you immediately realize, oh my God, where am I going to get high quality labeled training data to teach the machine? What transfer learning allows us to do is we take a giant generalized understanding of language, the Indico generalized model in orange there. We layer on top of that a set of pre-trained models, which you can use as bootstraps. And then most importantly, you're able to build custom machine learning models that precisely deliver the output that you desire. Effectively, you're able to sit your custom model on top of the Indico generalized model as an amplifier. By doing so, you can build high quality custom machine learning models with a very small amount of training data through a point and click friendly application interface. Next. And then machine teaching. So how do you do this? So with the Indico application, you're able to upload your sample training documents, easily create your attributes or classes that you're trying to classify or extract from these documents, and then label these using a point and click visual interface that's intuitive for the business user, the person closest to the data and the documents who can accurately train and define what it is we're trying to learn from these documents to make them a valuable part of our downstream process, essentially turning them into structured data. Next slide. So how do we help you achieve this deployment success? As I mentioned, building the models in any kind of ML approach is only a small part of the problem. From there, you need to have first a continual learning approach. So once those models are in production and operating, what you want them to do is get smarter over time. As your documents continue to be processed, and as your operators continue to review and make corrections to those documents, those models should get smarter over time. And that's the continual learning technology built into the Indico unstructured data platform. Next. The next is explainability. So you may have heard this term explainable AI or XAI. This is a set of features and functions that allow the user and the enterprise itself to understand at all times how these models are performing, how they're making their decisions, and most importantly, how to easily remediate those models when some of the outcomes are not desired or less than the accuracy you're hoping for. This is vital. Today in the enterprise, if you're going to use AI, you'll quickly realize that a set of compliance and governance folks will show up and they'll ask for detailed explainability metrics if you're asserting that you're going to use AI to solve one of these critical processes, especially in highly regulated industries like banking or insurance. And so you'll want a solution that has built-in point-and-click AI explainability, which Indico brings to the table with our application. Testing and benchmarking, also critical. The AI landscape moves very quickly. There are continuous innovations in AI driving the advancement of the capabilities of applications like Indico. And Indico is built a proprietary, and then we decided to open source it under the ENSO project, which allows us to benchmark key algorithmic advancements and developments in the industry. And then as we see those advancements being applicable to the kind of problems our customers have, we make those part of the subsequent releases of the platform. So testing and benchmarking is vital in a space that moves as fast as artificial intelligence. And then fourth, human in the loop. So part and parcel to an explainable AI approach, you must be able to intercept the models and the outcome of those models, review it, and make corrections where needed on a configurable basis. So when I ask customers, how accurate does the system need to be? I would be surprised if they ever said to me, oh, it has to be 50% or 70%. No, they always say, well, I need 100% accuracy, which is an understandable response. So my question always back to them is not what do you need the accuracy to be, but how can you get there, right? And human in the loop allows you to achieve the accuracies you need in your various workflows. Some workflows are very sensitive and where no mistakes are tolerable. Some workflows less sensitive. Something like derivatives agreements where a single mistake can result in a $100 million mistake. You might have 2 or 3 people review the outcome of these documents. What you're getting though is the acceleration of this processing through the workflow using AI as this giant bionic arm to help you achieve these tasks much faster, much less expensively, and with resources that you can apply to other high-value tasks. Next slide. So how do you think about tackling an unstructured data use case with Indico? The nice thing about Indico is this is really the playbook, right? You're able to solve many, many unstructured use cases on the Indico platform. It's not a point solution. You don't have to buy many, many point solutions. You're able to reuse this approach to solve a huge variety of your unstructured data challenges. We'll talk about some use cases in a moment. Next. So typically, when you're tackling an unstructured problem, you've got some kind of inbound unstructured data source. Let's pretend these are scanned documents, PDFs. We have OCR built into the platform. You need to lift the data off the page with OCR, so that's built into the Indico approach. Next. You then use our application to build these custom models. You upload your samples, you create your custom attributes, you label those samples, and you build this custom model quickly and easily for the interpretation of these documents. Next. Then you want to orchestrate that into workflow. Very frequently, you need to orchestrate a series of custom models together in a sequence to solve more complex problems. For example, very frequently, you need to first classify documents, then extract, then validate, then human in the loop, and so forth. And you do that through the Indico workflow orchestrator. Next. And speaking of human in the loop, the next stop would be your ability to configure your human in the loop rules. Depending on the confidence thresholds that you set within the platform, documents that fall below those confidence thresholds can be routed to the human in the loop interface, where your analyst can quickly review and correct any mistakes on those documents and send them on their way in the form of structured data. Next. And next again. Great. those corrections actually get trapped into what's called the staggered loop. And there you can use Indico's workflow analytics and explainable AI to determine how much the model has improved, how much time you've saved with the workflow, and a set of analytics around accuracy, straight through processing, time on task, and more. So that's the playbook here, which is relatively generic. You can apply this to almost any unstructured problem you have in the enterprise. Next. So let me take you through just a couple use case examples here to bring it home, and then we'll leave a bit of time for questions at the end. So lease abstractions in commercial real estate. This is a great example. Commercial lease documents are typically, a commercial lease, I should say, might have 10 or 12 different documents related to that lease, and you may have 250 different data elements that need to be pulled out of those documents so that you can turn them into your ERP system and your platform of record so you can manage those leases on a go-forward basis. Now, historically, that's just done with people, oftentimes, lawyers or real estate analysts, very time-consuming, very expensive. With Indico, we've had customers be able to dramatically reduce the time on task there and improve the accuracy and the amount of data that they could capture from this particular workflow. Dramatic impact to this, and a classic example of unstructured. These are legal documents coming from all sorts of different constituents and customers across the industry. Next. Underwriting is another great one for insurance. Again, long unstructured documents dealing with things like loss runs, requests for quotes, income worksheets, and all sorts of different documents that come into the broker underwriting process, which today, the faster you can turn around your underwriting process, the higher probability you have to win that business. So it really is a race against the clock. Using Indico, our customers are able to automate large chunks of that document interpretation, get that data into the underwriter's hands quicker, and win more business because they can turn those quotes around that much faster. Next example, commercial lending, another good one. Commercial lending typically involves many long unstructured documents that make up a decision as to whether to make a loan, and then second, to service that loan. Commercial loan servicing in and of itself is a very manual, document-intensive process. And with Indico, our customers have been able to build custom models that can interpret the documents related to a loan, the issuing or servicing of a loan, pull out the key structured data, feed that into the underwriting or decision engine, and then dramatically reduce the time it takes to either make decisions about a loan or the cost it takes to service that loan over its life. Next, smart inbox. This is a horizontally useful use case. Almost all of our customers have some kind of shared inbox that is in line of customer support or order management or sales management. And emails are a fundamentally unstructured object. The body of an email could be almost anything. And so the ability to build custom models that can learn to interpret the intent of an email, extract attributes, people, places, and things from those emails, turn that into structured data, and feed downstream systems like RPA, like CRM, like BI, like service ticket platforms, dramatically accelerates the speed at which you can handle inbound inquiries and respond to those using and capturing the understanding of your subject matter experts within your company precisely the way they would handle those emails manually. Next. Okay, and then just in conclusion here, just a couple samples of the kind of impact Indico has had and unstructured data can have on your business. So massive opportunity for dollar savings on the bottom line, capacity increase. You can grow your business without growing your costs. Accelerating processing, which means you're more competitive in the market. Higher data quality and data processing so that you can build a more robust product offering while still also reducing your expenses and quicker turnaround on things like the commercial leases that I described, driving down the overall cost of the key transactions that drive your business. Well, great. I think this is perfect. We've got, next slide, I think we've got about 6 minutes for questions. So please, as Jeremy mentioned, feel free to fire questions into the chat window. Jeremy will look at those and read those out to us, and we're happy to respond. So Jeremy, back to you. I know we've got a few questions I see there in the chat window already.
Awesome. Thanks, Tom. Thanks, Anil. Let's get right to questions. We got about 5 minutes left. So the first one here, I'll toss to Tom and then Anil. Feel free to add to Tom's answer. But the question is, what is the difference, or is there a benefit of using out-of-the-box use case specific models? For example, an out-of-the-box model for invoices or claims as an example. Are these useful? Are these helpful?
I think so. I think there's a set of use cases where pre-built models can be a big benefit. I think invoices is a great example of that, right? I think they have their limits though, because what I found is that major enterprises all do things slightly differently. And so the frustration with out of the box comes when you need to modify those, right? And so with an Indico custom model approach, you are able to modify either our out of the box models or your custom models to get precisely what you want from those workflows.
Great, Anil. Anything you'd add to that? Yeah, just to add to that. So I think largely I agree with Tom. So it can have its benefits. At other places you may want a more customized model. I think one of the places where we see, or one of the ways in which it does help is particularly as you maybe seek to get started out and so on. Having an out-of-the-box model can alleviate some of the pain with a whole bunch of training, and also maybe shorten the time to start showing ROI, right? So it may not be the perfect fix, but it can still provide some benefits as you start with some upfront training already built into the model.
Yep, absolutely.
Great. Looks like we have time for probably 2 more questions. So the next one I have here, Anil, feel free to take a first pass at this, and then Tom, you can add. Are RPA and intelligent automation, or IDP, competitive? We are a document understanding shop, or UiPath shop, and I'm wondering if IDP can add to what I'm doing with document understanding. Can you give an example of how the 2 technologies could work together? So Anil, do you want to take that one first?
Sure. So RPA and intelligent document processing are not necessarily competing against each other, right? Because what RPA does is essentially it handles more of the structured data that we were talking about, right? So for example, it's really good at, let's say, picking up something from a database, putting it into a system of record where what it is picking up essentially structured data. It knows where to locate it through rules. You can actually direct RPA to the location it needs to pick it up, and the location it needs to send it to, and other rules-based manipulations in between. Now, where RPA tends to fail is when it hits the semi-structured or the unstructured data space, right? And that is precisely where IDP comes into play. And so IDP can help with unstructured and semi-structured documents, convert that into structured, and that the resultant output from IDP then actually can be passed on to RPA as well. So essentially, the way I see it is RPA and IDP can certainly work in concert. They don't really, compete against each other, so to speak. Rather, they can be very much complementary. So, regardless of the RPA solution that you already currently have, IDP can certainly end up, solving other problems for you that maybe RPA can't.
Yeah, that's right. I think that things like document understanding or IQBot, from Automation Anywhere, or some of the other offerings, they've solved some nice sort of structured document processing problems. Typically things like company or government forms are achievable using those kinds of approaches. I think Indico in particular, we tend to pick up where those leave off, right? If you looked at think about the examples I walked through, they tend to be longer documents, very unstructured, complex, hundreds of fields to be extracted rather than say less than a dozen, and highly scalable, so millions of documents to be processed. So I think it's a question of use cases, but as Anil said, I think they're more compatible than they are substitutes.
Awesome. Well, it looks like we are right at the top of the hour, so I think we'll stop there. So thanks again, everyone, for joining us today. Thank you, Tom and Anil, for presenting. Just as a reminder, we will follow up with a recording to the webinar, and any of the other questions we didn't get to, we will follow up with an answer via email as well. So thanks again, everyone, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Anil. Thank you, Jeremy.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.